Welcome back, everybody, to another update to the state of the Malazan Empire and the scarf and all the other things. And the scarf has grown further. I'll just put it around my neck again because I feel that's the only way that it kind of shows how long it's become at this point. I'm also obviously struggling with all this yarn. I'm not a cat. Why is there so much? Anyway, that's how it looks right now. I feel like I'm gonna do a little bit more and then we're done with this thing and I can start new projects. What those will be, time will tell. I can just tell you that I ordered 4 pounds of wool, which I will use, well, wisely. No, not wisely, because it's me. Anyway, we got new beer, Aktienzwickel, something new, and I'll just, talk about Book 4 of Deadhouse Gates. It's even called Deadhouse Gates. And, well, let's start. A very good beer. I like that kind of Zwicker. Anyway, so book 4, once again, is rather longer than the others. It's actually almost as long as the other 3 books of Deadhouse Gates combined. So I'm going to take this more or less chapter by chapter. Not chapter by chapter, but sort of. We'll see. Also, as I mentioned, time is rather short today. I recorded this before, over an hour ago. Then I had a video call with a band from Cyprus to talk about some contract stuff, which is settled. So I'll do this recording now, and then I'll go and celebrate the fact that I've signed a band from Cyprus. And then I'll just, cry in pain because I realized that because I was not well mentally the last week or so, a lot of stuff has piled up and I need to deal with all of that tomorrow. And yeah, I've more or less tried to flee into the Malazan Book of the Fallen for the last week, which is good for me and good for you, not so good for people who actually wait for answers from me. And I have to deal with that tomorrow, so I can drop off a lot of packages on Monday at the post office. But enough of that. Let's get to something more positive. Not positive, because we're talking about Deadhouse Gates. We're talking about the chained dogs. We're talking about people dying in the desert or the steppes, or, well, people dying mostly and people being desperate. So yeah, let's do that. And I've picked out two main things, sort of 2.5 things from the first chapter of book 4, and I feel that's already more than enough for one video because there's a lot of thoughts going into this whole thing. So first we're going to talk about, and I said this before, but at this point the book has basically narrowed down to 3 main narratives. We have the Chain of Dogs narrative with our friend Daika being the only viewpoint there. We have actually it's 4 threats, but I kind of forgot that there's also the Kalam going to Unter kind of thing, the Kalam and Menala threat going on. We're not going to talk about that right now. We talk about the Chain of Dogs now, and we're going to talk a bit about the Felicin, Heboric, Shaik rebellion part. We're also going to leave out the Mapo Fiddler bit for this video because, as I said, I feel there's more than enough stuff going on here for one video. And we're going to start with the army in the Chain of Dogs, and we're gonna have to figure out loyalties, witnessing, and things like that. All right, let's do that. And once again, I'm not going to go deeply into the plot, but I'm going to go sort of along the timeline. And the first meeting we have there is that kind of Council of War with Captain Selmar and Daika, Lal, and all the others standing there and deciding where to go. And Selmar is once again kind of defending the nobleman, and that's kind of makes him look bad. But we have to remember how the Malazan army is different from other armies at the time. And I'm just saying that if you guys read some of the actual Path to Ascendancy novels by Ian Esselmont, then you know more about other armies, but it's something that is once again taken from real-world politics and real-world history. So let's look at that. A lot of armies, a lot of, not all armies, but a lot of traditional, medieval, and older armies are not built and organized on merit. They're built and organized on wealth and power. That means if you want to be an officer, you'd better have a rich family and be already a nobleman. Otherwise, you're not going to get into that kind of job. There's exemptions. There's obviously exceptions to that. There are some armies that are already organized meritocratically. The new model army of Oliver Cromwell's is definitely one of them. The Roman army obviously is also one, and I'm not gonna tell you something super exciting and new when I tell you that there's a lot of influence of the Roman armies in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, right? You already knew that. Well, so the next bit we need to figure out, need to understand, is time once again. Sometimes in the first books at least, it feels like the Malazan Empire is old. It's like it's established power, it's spread super widely, it's large, and it's old. Well, think again, it's not old. It's 100 years old. 100 years mean nothing. 100 years are basically nothing in our world, and even less in a world that has, like, I don't know, 300,000 years of written or not written but existing history. And what we need to understand is that customs change slowly. They change super slowly in our world. 100 years are not enough to change the perception of nobility, to change the overall way, the customs of how armies are run, how advancement in armies is made, and so forth. And yes, the emperor changed that, and he went and said it's only merit and nothing else. But there's still obviously the expectation from a lot of people that noble-born have it easier when they enter the army. We see that in a lot of situations with Captain Paran at the beginning, the captain, and when Adjutant Lorne meets him at Kokan, the captain is not noble-born, and there's, because we see it from his viewpoint, he's like, oh, the noble-born have it easier, someone in Unter is pulling strings, and they're like, well, we know that's kind of ironic because that's not what's happening there, but what I'm trying to say is the common soldiery has a mistrust of noble-born officers, even if they reach their job, their position, their rank, just due to their merit, because they're good soldiers, which just happens to be with a lot of them. On the other hand, the nobility at home basically still expects the loyalty of their, like, relations that made it into the army and made it up in the army. And that's another thing. It's like Captain Selma there has this double loyalty, and he's struggling with that very much. And it's like, you see that people are like, everyone is like angry at him, Lull is angry at him, and Bolt's, of course, and all of those people. But Daika kind of understands that double loyalty, and it's important that we see that in there, because it will set up some stuff for later on that I'm not going to talk about in this video. But yet, just beware of the fact that this is going on there, and that's Selma is someone who's driven between those two loyalties. He's trying to make things to be a good soldier, and as a good soldier he knows what is the best decision, but he's also thinking about the refugees, the nobles that are sort of behind him, his family, all of that. It's riding on his decision to actually speak up and put forth his observations. He also makes a big distinction that other people like Bolt and Coltane and others and the soldiers are not making. He's taking the refugees seriously in a way. that might be a flawed way, but he thinks of them as another actor. And we're going to look at that in a moment. For the others, and that's kind of set up in the whole like chain of dogs, they drag them and so forth. The refugees are seen as a burden. You drive them, like, you know, that in book 3 at the one situation where they have the Weasel clan of the Wiccans actually making sure they stay in their place and so forth. They are just pushed around and dragged around. And what Selma is doing, he's sort of actually taking their voices seriously. And we got to go back to that later on, so I'm just going to leave it here at this point. All right, let's move on to the really big one there. That's when it's going to come up again anyway. And that's the ride back of Daika together with Captain Lull. And they're talking about the cattle. They're talking about the cattle being mindless and driven to their deaths, just like the soldiers. And that parallelism there is obviously powerful, but on the other hand, we come to that big discussion there, the important discussion there that Daika and Lull have. And Daika says to Lull, when Lull says it kind of envies those mindless beasts, and Daika says there no salvation lies that way. And Lull is like, I'm not looking for salvation, I'm looking for a reason to go on. And that's one of those like sort of deep sentences and deep conversations that actually is deep in a way, because it goes back to that whole agency thing and the difference and awareness and self-awareness thing. And it's something that's important for humans. It's the one thing that we still don't know how to deal with in computer science when it comes to artificial intelligence, to actually have awareness and self-awareness. We're not sure if animals have it or not because communication barriers, but let's face it, in this dialogue that doesn't matter because I'm getting derailed again. Good me. Well, what I'm trying to say here is that we have the fact put plainly that he's not looking for salvation. And when you look at it, a lot of people are trying to find, are trying to put meaning in their lives, to not accept the futility of their actions, because Lull at this point knows, and Daika also knows, that what they're doing is basically futile. They're marching on, and then at some point they're going to be slaughtered, whether it's at that river crossing or beyond the river crossing or whatever. At this point they believe it's going to be at the river crossing, or at least Daika believes it's going to be at the river crossing. And you know your actions are futile, but you still do them. Now for the animals it's easy. They're driven by the cattle dogs, they're driven by the herders and everything, and then they die, and they don't need an internal reason to do something. They have an external force pushing them. Up to a point, the refugees have the same. That's what I said. We're going to come back to it. It's like the refugees, they have no choice. They are basically dragged and pushed along. They're at this point, at least from the point of view that we have, and that's a soldier's point of view, even though Daika is sort of this weird thing between a soldier and a outside observer at this point, but you know, we have him anyway. Sorry. So we have that soldier's point of view, but from that point of view, the refugees are very much like the animals, like the cattle. They're just like drag and push along. What their internal motivations are and doesn't count at this point. It has been discounted by waved aside by Bolt and Coltane several times, every time they show up. And why this is the case, that's something we should probably talk about later on as well. But at this point, basically the only people who have a choice, or at least the illusion of a choice, are the soldiers. They need a reason to move on. They are the ones at this point who are dragging the whole thing. They need reasons. And I find it significant that at this point, Daika brings up the word of salvation, because when you look in the outside world in our day and age, you have this like rather arrogantly voiced thing from some of the more of the skeptic atheist community that say like religion is this crutch for people who can't face the nothingness and so forth. And I'm not going to go too deeply into this because this is not the religion class. I'm not running a religion class, don't worry. This is something else. The point there is, though, there's no salvation, but it's still very, very, very difficult. And this has got nothing to do with like intellectual things or whatever. It's very difficult to find enough meaning to actually take on the agency and actually decide to actively do something. The refugees and the animals, they're passive. They're just pushed along and forced. The soldiers need to be active, and it's a choice. It's a deliberate choice to take on the responsibility, to take on that agency, and decide to do it, no matter the consequences, no matter the actual like meaning outside of just doing it. The meaning, and that's what we're going to come back to in a minute again, foreshadowing. It's almost like I've read too much Malazan and are starting to do foreshadowing. Shit. Anyway, so the point is we humans need reasons to do things. Otherwise, we don't do them, basically. We need reasons to do things. And in the face of futility, it can become very difficult to find those reasons and still step up and do things. Just because they're right, no matter who knows about that. Which is why it's so significant that our viewpoint character there is a historian who, by definition, writes things down. And we're going to go to that now, because we're coming to that very, very powerful, emotionally powerful scene, at least for me, where the former servants are getting their uniforms and insignia of the Chain of Dogs. And this is powerful for a few reasons, well, mainly for one, but I'm going to, talk a bit about it, around it anyway. First thing, we learned something. They are called servants. They're not employees. They're owned. They were bought by Coltane. And Lull says, they could have survived. They could have been like sold to another master and so forth. Those are not what we consider like actually employed servants. They are indentured servants, which is basically slaves at this point. Just saying, it's just an observation to keep in mind there. And they have decided, after Coltane has bought them, they have decided to actually join the army. And there's that scene, they get it, and at some point they laugh, and, keep that laughter in mind. Laughter is a very powerful emotion that comes up again and again for all kinds of reasons within the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I'm just saying, keep it in mind. Not going to go deeper into that right now, though. What I wanted to say, though, was that after they were bought free from their owners, their masters, they have deliberately chosen to join the army, the 7th Army. And Lull is like, they could have survived if they had remained, but they chose to join the army. Now they have a sword in their hand and they're gonna die, because at this point, like, no one believes they will survive. No spoilers here. I'm not going to spoil anything. I'm just saying, at this point in time, no one believes that they will survive. But they have still chosen. And that brings us back to that question of agency. Once those servants have decided to join the 7th Army, they've basically chosen death, but it's them who has chosen it. It's not someone else who chose it for them. Yes, they kind of belong to the army, and the army belongs to Coltane, and we got to think about that at some other point. But that choice is their own choice. Now, on the surface level, it looks like one of those like pathos-laden kind of things where it's like, I'd rather die free than live as a slave and stuff like that. That's not what it like, you know, that's what people trump about, but when they use the word freedom for all kinds of bullshit. But what it really boils down to, what it really boils down to is that they had the choice. They had that one choice to decide what to do, well knowing the consequences. And that's the important bit there. And the fact that it's then like the handing over of the uniforms is done so like professionally, quietly, without any pomp and circumstance, you know, without any pomp around it. It's not a big ceremony. They just get their uniforms and that's that. Is really important, and it's acknowledged that it's that important. It's really important because that shows respect. It's like other people who have made that same deliberate choice to join the army, to take that agency into their own hand, face the consequences, face those things that are certain. I mean, you decide to become a soldier in that kind of army, you know you're going to die sooner or later. That's a fact. Even outside of the rebellion, it's just like fact. Anyway, so at the point to make this very professional is basically the idea that they are respected and accepted as equals in that group that has that freedom, that has the freedom to make that choice and actually take fate into their own hands. Like, not fate, like, but you know what I mean. And when you look at history, now I come to that next thing there that I wanted to say. And when you look at history, how it's written at historiography, whether you read, I don't know, Thucydides or some of those Roman boring historians or whatever, they'll describe battles. They'll describe parades and big ceremonies, big speeches. That's how history is written, or was written in that time. We kind of have to look at that kind of time, not at contemporary historiography, which has splintered into all kinds of different traditions, schools, and thoughts and whatnot. But when you look at classical historiography, we have those things. What we don't get, what people don't write, is those small scenes that are really important, the human scenes. Like this very quiet handing over of the uniforms. And it's Lull who says to Daika, write this down. And well, it's Daika, he's a soldier, first and foremost. He's an historian, but he's also a soldier. So there's a good chance he might write it down. I'm not gonna, there's a chance he might write this actually down. And it's very, very important. It's something, keep that in mind for the rest of the series, to actually show those small, human, everyday scenes, to witness those. That's very, very important in this entire series, and especially also here. Just saying, keep that in mind, and it's very important that this is shown here and given in a way the importance and gravity it deserves and would not get if this was a properly written history by a historian, like historiographer, who's like read like 500 years later. Normally, like in our world, that doesn't happen. And the fact that this is like shown as being where the actual importance lies is very, very important. I've used the word importance a lot. I'm sorry for that. Anyway, let's actually switch and go to the other big scene slash like collection of scenes I wanted to talk about. Felicin and Heboric. Sitting with Leoman and the Toblikai. And Felicin having to decide whether to take on the role of Shaik, reborn. Now we're going to talk about something there, and we already know at this point, to take on the role of Shaik means to be possessed by the goddess. And I want you to think about the word possession there literally. Because we have those two possible candidates. We had Uppsala, who was possessed by Cotillion. And we have Felicin. But Felicin has also been possessed in a quite literal sense. She was sold as a slave. Slaves are possession. She was then possessed within her role as a slave. She was possessed by Benneth at the mining camp. her idea of possession is probably a much clearer idea and conception than the idea of like divine or demonic possession, which we also had already. Or how to say that? I feel that the idea of material possession, in a way that Felicien has suffered it, while basically boiling down to something very similar to the demonic or divine possession of Absalom or Mammoth in Game of Thrones bullshit, in Gardens of the Moon. While the one is once again using, like, putting on these like magical trappings, that thing I talked about when I was talking about the demons and slavery, but it's like you kind of accept the idea of demonic or divine possession within the bounds of a fantasy book, while ignoring the fact that they are basically the same as material possession in the way of slavery or something, and like objectification that happen in the real world. And the fact that right now, with that scene or these ideas with Felicien and Absalom, that Steven Erikson manages to put this forward, that possession literally means that you are made the object of someone else's will, is just something to keep in mind. And once again, there is also always within the Malazan Book of the Fallen this reflection on the genre of fantasy literature, fantasy gaming, and so forth. And this is one of those moments where this comes to the fourth. And yeah, we realize now there's this super powerful situation. There's a super powerful situation where where Felicien talks about grief being rape of the mind, and she knows all about rape. It's all about acquiescence, and that's a statement you should, like, just let sink in and think about hard. And then we look at how she and Absalom dealt with their possessions. And the thing is, Absalom had outside help. You remember that scene at the beginning of Garden of the Moon when she meets the wax witch and she takes that one candle, and then later on when Cotillion leaves her and Mallet looks at her and says, like, yeah, there's like some other presence in there who kept her safe. That's obviously the wax witch keeping herself safe. Felicien didn't have anything like that. She had to find that place the hard way. She had to find that place to keep her inner self safe the hard way. It's like to actually let all this possession, whether it's by Bennett or whatever, happening. Let all that happening without touching her, or maybe touching her. We're going to talk about how much she actually remained untouched at a different point. But she had to keep that. She had to find that out the hard way. So maybe she's actually, unlike Absalom, she's actually in the position where she knows what she's getting into when she lets possession happen again. She then decides to actually do that, and we're not going to talk about that yet. She just says that she will do it at the Oasis. We then get another, like, a very powerful scene there between her and Heboric. That's one that I find very interesting to think about and talk about, is because they both know and realize that they cannot communicate with each other. They lack understanding. And to the awareness of that incapability of communication, that impossibility of communication, is just something that's really, really sad and terrifying to realize, the way I see it. I'm not going to go deeper into that right now. I'm just saying it kind of struck me this time around. Was there more? Yes. Like Heboric having hands again, like magical hands, is cool. Him getting a second sight while losing his normal sight is something that I have like mixed feelings about from my personal view. On the other hand, it's the echoing of a very classic trope of people losing their sight and then becoming seers. You have your that's something that you find in Greek mythology, something that you find all over the world. And there's psychological reasons for that, and I'm not going to go into that. I'm just saying it's kind of, touches me in a weird way sometimes to think about that kind of thing, but I'm not going to quibble there. I think that's all I want to say today, because there's going to be another video tomorrow, and I need to deal with other things today and send 178 packages. Life is fun, and so is Malazan, despite of all the stuff going on. So I'll talk to you real soon, and until then, cheers.